Well, hello everyone. Thank you again for taking the time to join us on this midweek Hebrew word study. We are in Daniel chapter 4, and this is being recorded. I have a conflict tomorrow that we can't do a live class, so I wanted to get a lesson out to you. We're in such an exciting period here in the book of Daniel, and so many exciting things that I hope I can share some of the joy that I'm having of researching this, and that you'll find and experience the same thing. So here we go with chapter 4. Of course, remembering that in the Hebrew Bible, chapter 4 starts where a little bit different place than in the Christian Bibles. It's actually after the doxology of Nebuchadnezzar, and we start out with Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And so, what we're looking at here on the screen is actually the um, Hebrew version, Jewish Bible, and it talks. I just want to read through some of this so you can get a flavor for what it is in English before we go back and look at some of the interesting words here. So, Nebuchadnezzar was at rest in his house, flourishing in my palace. Remember that. We're going to dig into that. He saw a dream which made him afraid. Imaginings upon his bed. We're going to look at what that could mean, what that word means. Visions of my head affrighted me. Just love the English here. And therefore, I made a decree. Obviously, this freaked him out to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of this dream. What we do see is his summoning of these magicians. Here we get to verse 4. Um, Enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers. We'll look at there's a group missing in there that were in some of the previous ones. And I told the dream to them, and they could not make the interpretation thereof. This is a very different scenario than his previous dreams, where he threatened punishment. First he wouldn't tell them the dream, and then said, if you don't tell me the dream, I'm going to kill you all and demolish everything you own. He softened his stance here a little bit. So we see a little bit of progression in his kingship and not putting the pressure on these guys. The fact that he still keeps them around and that they, were still important in his realm is kind of interesting to me. And then I think it's strange when we get to verse 5 that at last Daniel came in, and it talks about his name Belteshazzar, which is his Babylonian name. And then he makes some statements that are kind of interesting. The spirit of the holy gods, in the Hebrew Jewish Bible, they left this as a small g. We'll look at that. And then I told him the dream. And he called Belteshazzar, remember this is Daniel, the master of the magicians. Remember, he was put in charge of all of them. Seems funny that all the other ones would come in first and Daniel would come in last, and okay, none of the other guys could get it. I guess I'll work this out. The dynamic here is pretty interesting. The king says, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you. There's no secret it causes you trouble. Another very interesting statement that we want to look at. And then we're going to stop here at the end of verse 6 in the Hebrew Bible, which would be at the end of verse 9 in the Christian Bible. So there's a lot of commentary here by the Jewish sages. They talk about the whole story that's coming up. Obviously, we'll learn more as we go into this, but they talk about a word here that I had never heard before. And if I'm pronouncing it right, it's lycanthropy, and I had no idea what this is, so I had to go to our friend Wikipedia here. And as we look at this, this is actually a somewhat, here it says not to be confused with werewolf syndrome, but there's another place where it says that they were very similar. So this is a rare psychiatric syndrome that involves an affected person can transform into a non-human animal. Talks about the werewolf type of situation here. Again, a lot of folklore, a lot of fairy tales and things. We've all heard of this, but never really realized that this was a real phenomenon, and that in order for fairy tales and folklore to occur, somebody had to go through this. And so it's interesting how this is kind of brought up here in the Hebrew Bible and talks about this being brought to be in this king that he turns into this. And we'll remember that as we continue to study. So then it brings out a few ideas here of the rest and the flourishing, which we're going to take a look at. And and let's see. He talks about the spirit of the holy gods. While that seems strange to us, they're pointing out here that in other Phoenician inscriptions in that time period, this was a very common phrase to use in their polytheistic or multi-pagan god culture. And we struggle with understanding how much paganism or religion, if you want to call it that, figured into their culture and was important in their government. Again, it's very difficult for us to comprehend things like that, but here we see just a little taste of it. So let's leave that and take a look at some of the words that are in here, and they're very interesting. So this is verse 4 in the Christian Bible, same words as what we see in the Hebrew Bible. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house, flourishing. So what are these? What's this flourishing? Let's open this up, and it talks about that this word has reference to green and prosperous. And what it helped me realize is if you're familiar with history and the seven wonders of the ancient world, one of them was called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Uh, Another one was the pyramids. There were a number of them, and you can look those up if you're interested. But the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were called one of the seven wonders of the world. Here it's attributed to Nebuchadnezzar around 600 BCE. He is said to please built the gardens to please his wife. And of course, there's sketches. Uh, we have no real understanding of what they were. They were destroyed. There are some archaeological digs that are going on in Iraq. Some people think they were not real, but they have survived in legend and folklore. And so here, I think it's kind of interesting that we see an indication in the um, Aramaic of the book of Daniel that gives the indication he was in a garden. He was looking at things green. And why wouldn't he have been in his garden resting and relaxing, and give some understanding to these beautiful hanging gardens of Babylon. And so I thought that was very, very interesting. So he's there because what does flourishing in your house mean? Difficult words to understand, but you can picture it if he's sitting in his garden looking at all the beautiful, one of the seven wonders of the world that made that title had to be pretty incredible, better than any garden, we have ever seen. And knowing that it was in the middle of a very arid desert-like place gave it even a more beautiful reputation. So the gardens in his palace, and then he saw a dream which made him afraid, and the thoughts on his bed. So he was laying out there and had this dream. So, what are these thoughts on my bed? Sounds very interesting. So, let's look up that word. And of course, it's an Aramaic word, har. It's a mental conception. And this is just really, really kind of cool where these thoughts in your bed come from. Fantasies, he's laying down and things are imagining, going through his mind. This is thought to be somewhat of an unstable individual. And so it's interesting that these aren't just daydreams, these are some real fantasies that this guy is having. And he saw a vision, and whatever this vision was, it troubled him. Well, this word trouble is in a PL form, which is a very intensive form of the Aramaic and the Hebrew, kind of hand in hand, that tell you it's very deep, very intense. And so it gives the understanding this could mean to terrify, to be alarmed. Um, a hurried panic response caused by terror or fear. We've all had nightmares. We know what that's like, so we can kind of relate. So here's where the king is. Had a nightmare, had a dream. It seems to be in the daytime. So what was going on with this guy? And it troubled him. Therefore, he brought a decree of all the wise men of Babylon to make this dream known. Again, a repeat of what was talked about previously in the book of Daniel, but without any of the threats for failure to tell him of his dream. So then we get to verse 7. We see that he calls the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, but then there's a group here that are different, this soothsayers. Um, they're not the same number of guys. Sometimes the soothsayers are included, but when we look back in Daniel chapter 2, we see there were sorcerers here instead of soothsayers. And I thought that was interesting why the commonality of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, but then sometimes there's a soothsayer, sometimes there's a sorcerer there. And I don't quite understand why the difference, even between magicians, astrologers, the ones that look at the stars. Chaldeans are supposed to be the wise men. The soothsayers are supposed to be the ones that conjure up things and interpret dreams. Um, just interesting to understand what their category was. We don't have things like this today. We have governments where you have the Department of, head of the Department of Defense and the head of the Department of all these different Homeland Security, and we can understand those compartments. But here in this realm, they had departments for these type of advisors who were obviously using supernatural means along with maybe wisdom of the Chaldeans, but borderline spooky, you know, type of uh, inspiration from sources that, we just go, wow, how I can't understand how they can operate this way. And, but yet here we have it called out. Um, when we look at verse 7, we see that uh, looking at uh, the reality of their actions. The word 59, 54, I wanted to look up here. And it is, okay, 59. You'll see it's in parentheses. And so this is, again, very interesting in the documents themselves that they have words that they didn't know what they mean. But this word being translated as came in does not look like the word I've ever seen for coming in. So as I opened this up, I was incredibly mystified to find out that this word, which is pronounced Allah, is understood to act severely, to abuse, to mock, to make a fool of. And this is very interesting. It's mocking their behavior. And I just wonder if the reason this is in parentheses is there isn't something that's in the Hebrew understanding, the Jewish understanding of this, to put some humor in, to show that, okay, these other guys were coming to make the interpretation known, but they were just foolish. They were just a mockery, and God was maybe describing the reality of their actions on how it looked to God, how it looked to Daniel as he was, watching this all take place and saying, this is just a circus going on here of these. Because you can imagine that all these magicians and astrologers and Chaldeans were saying, King, tell me what the dream is. And as he's telling it bit by bit, they're saying, well, that means that, or maybe that will mean that, or trying to give an interpretation. And finally, all of their theories, all of their interpretations suddenly were just confusion and nonsense, and no one could agree between them. And it had to be just like a three-ring circus going on here. And the king is bouncing back and forth, not knowing what's going on, not getting the answer that he wants. And all of a sudden he just goes, time out, stop. This guy was obviously prone to outbursts of emotion. in anger, and I can just see him throwing up his hand and say, "Get out of here, stop. Bring in Daniel, bring in Belteshazzar. He's the one I really trust. He's got the Spirit of God inside of him, of the Holy God. He's the guy that I really, really believe in, the guy that I'm really going to trust." And so in comes Daniel, and he gets accolades from the king. Um, Again, it uses the word holy, which unfortunately in our 21st century mindset and vernacular has a very different meaning than what it meant in the Hebrew Bible. It means to be separated, it means to be set apart. And so dedicated, separated, and dedicated. So here Daniel was dedicated to his God. He was separated from the other things that could influence him in the lifestyle of the Babylonians and the worship of the Babylonians, and was dedicated only to the one true God. And the king was making reference of that. So I always have to remind myself of that, that when I see the word holy in English, it's from kadosh in the Hebrew or kadash in the Aramaic. And it is to be separated, to be dedicated for a specific plan, purpose, and and that sort of thing. So that's where we're going to stop today. I hope you are intrigued by that. Obviously, you can read ahead if you wish to, but we're going to pick up next time. We do have off for 2 weeks with the holidays, but we'll pack up again after the first of the year. So I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy Jesus's birthday, and a Happy New Year. And Lord so willing, we'll all meet back together here in January and continue with this incredible dream, and see what Nebuchadnezzar has going on. All right. God bless. Bye bye.